Given the Switch 2 features a 120Hz screen that is available to everyone, do you foresee 40 FPS being a common target refresh rate for developers, allowing them to push image quality on the device and still achieve a pleasant experience in terms of fluidity and input lag? So for those of us who haven't sort of religiously devoured Digital Foundry content, the way 40 FPS works is that it's an even divider for 120, right? So the screen basically updates with the same frame 3 times. And similar to the way that 30 FPS is a divider of 60 FPS, with the same image displayed twice, in effect, you get what is the perception of smooth motion. It just looks smoother. It kind of presents as a sort of midway point between 30 FPS and 60 FPS, and it's actually really good in the games that support it. So yes, this is available to Switch 2 because it supports 120 Hertz. And in actual fact, Cyberpunk 2077 at the hands-on there, that seems to be talking about a performance mode that runs at 40 FPS. My friend Mike Channel from Outside Xbox was actually at that hands-on yesterday. And docked quality targets 1080p 30 FPS. Obviously, we know from the footage we've seen it's dynamic. Mm-hmm. Docked performance 1080p 40 FPS. Handheld quality 1080p 30. I guess that's going to be much more aggressive DRS there.
Oh, yeah.
Handheld performance 720p 40. All kind of makes sense there. I guess we could be seeing more 40 FPS modes because, the user doesn't really need to do anything to configure their screen. Certainly on the handheld side of things, it's just going to work, right, Alex?
Yeah, this is actually why I love this aspect of Switch 2 screen, this and HDR, because for a lot of multi-platform games, as well as, just for anything, these things that are like extra little bonus things that we've talked about over the years, and HDR is kind of one of them, is that since it's not standardized, there's no great incentive to take advantage of it always. Mm-hmm. And here, the base unit in its probably most used mode has a higher technical, like the floor of technical, I don't know, like feature set is higher than even a PS5, right?
Yeah, a developer on PlayStation has no guarantee that the user will be able to connect to a 120 hertz screen, whereas it's a given with the handheld mode on the Switch too, certainly.
Yeah, and in that aspect, I think we're going to actually see a greater amount of all of those cool things that we liked. I think we're going to see, even though if the screen's HDR isn't perfect in any sense of the word, I think we're going to see a lot of HDR on Switch, and it's going to be, and like when a game is like only SDR because it's a strange port, we're going to complain about it. I think that's going to happen pretty often at times because, there's going to be some developers who don't get with the program. But I think we're going to see like more HDR, we're going to see more 40 FPS modes. And in the case of the Switch 2, it's a really good idea to use 40 FPS, especially maybe in that handheld mode because lower clocks for everything, maybe not CPU, but lower clocks, you're not going to be able to hit stuff always. 1080p to 720p, it's already going to look pretty good given the screen size. And also, you're going to be seeing ports from games that are maybe coming from like PlayStation 5, right? That had 60 FPS modes there, which probably won't run at 60 FPS on a Switch 2, and that nice middle ground of 40 is going to just really boost it. So I think this is awesome. I'm very happy to see that standard applied to such a small little form factor console.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective also, if the game has support for 40 FPS on the handheld side of things, there's a far greater likelihood of that 40 FPS mode going into the docks mode as well, as opposed to just skipping it. Any extra thoughts, Oliver?
Yes, I mean, I would agree with all your thoughts so far. My only question here is if you're doing a 40 FPS mode, in theory, why not do a 42 FPS mode or a 50 FPS mode if it's all VRR and all the same to the developer? I could definitely see that being the case, but I also think 40 FPS is probably a good number to standardize around because if you have a 120 hertz panel, for sure 40 FPS can look good, even if you don't have VRR support. That might be a nice way to homogenize your visual options a little bit there. But I would also caution that you're always going to need a version of your game that can look good at 60 hertz with SDR rendering and no VRR, because that is like the default minimum viable specification for the docked play there. Whether you're connected to a 1440p screen or a 1080p screen or a 4K screen, or I think they even have an option for a 720p screen, you're going to need to have that configuration of your game working. So you cannot just rely on a user having a 120 hertz display or a VRR display. The Switch 2 is going to be connected to, I'm sure, a lot of pretty crappy displays, a lot of pretty bad displays there, and it's going to need to have some accommodation there as well.
Yeah. A further asterisk to add to that is in handheld mode, you've still got that 10 watt power limit, assuming that the 2-hour battery life is indeed the minimum that the machine is capable of. The reason why is that, obviously, hey, I've got a VRR screen, I'm just going to unlock the frame rate. Well, actually, it may make sense to put a frame rate cap of some description on there simply to maintain battery life, right? Which seems to be at a premium. So so basically, already limited handheld capabilities, you're not going to be seeing sky high frame rates across the board. And there are reasons why you should still have a frame rate cap, even though you've got a VRR screen. But you're quite right, Oliver, that frame rate cap can be, essentially arbitrary. It can be balanced, which is certainly an extra element of freedom that's nice to have.